everyone, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today I'm so excited to share with you Cirque's new Glazed 2024 collection. So just in case you are new to Cirque, they actually had released two previous Glazed collections a couple of years ago. The first one had a few more neutral kind of tones, a little bit more of a muted, subdued palette, and then the second collection was brighter. And I am just so excited to see another addition to their Glazed line because if you don't know, I am a huge fan of Cirque's Jellies. I mean, just look at this lineup. It is like a perfect little rainbow lineup, which I am also a big fan of. I will save more of my thoughts at the end though, after some comparisons and even some recreation attempts. But for now, let's just get into the swatches. So the first polish we have is Poppy Jelly, and this one is described as a bright, warm red. So the formula on this one, as expected, is a bit sheer, but pretty even coverage for the most part on the first coat. I personally wouldn't wear this in just one. I would at least build it up in two just to give it a little bit more color. And it really does even out in coverage on the second coat, so I think it's a lot more passable, obviously assuming you aren't bothered by the visible nail line. But yeah, as usual, I am going to be building this up in 3 coats for this video, and I really do love the finished look of this one, which took me by surprise because I normally am not a fan of orange leaning reds. I never thought they were super flattering on me, but I don't know, there's something about this one being a little bit squishy that I think just makes it a bit more flattering, so I think this one's cute. Next up we have Mango Jelly, and this one is described as an orange-yellow jelly. So this one was easily one of my favorites from this collection. I just really love mangoes, and I feel like this is the perfect mango color. I definitely don't think it's really flattering on the first coat alone just because of how yellow it makes your nail look, but this one was really pigmented, I found. It wasn't as sheer or light in color as I was kind of expecting it to be, so I feel like it just built up really nicely on 2 coats alone. You still are going to get a ton of visible nail line because this is a lighter shade. So I wanted to see how much more it gets covered up with the third coat, and it does blur it like a little tiny bit, but it's definitely still there. Either way, I absolutely love the color. It's definitely a new favorite yellow. Up next we have Starfruit Jelly, and this one is described as a chartreuse jelly. So if you know me, you know that I don't love chartreuse. It's quite honestly one of my least favorite colors, especially for nail polish, but I absolutely adore this one. I don't know if it's just because it's in a jelly formula, but I feel like there's just something so pretty about this shade, where it definitely is very much a yellow leaning green, but it's not too yellow, if that makes sense. I feel like this one could pass as like a really, really bright lime green, even though there already is a lime jelly, which we'll see later on. But anyway, in terms of the formula, I found that this one did apply as smoothly and evenly as the other jellies. It was just a little bit more sheer and not as pigmented as Mango Jelly, which was kind of surprising to me. I would have expected Mango would have been more sheer than this one. Next we have Lagoon Jelly, and this one is described as a robin's egg blue, which to be honest is not what I immediately thought of. I guess when I think of robin's egg, I think of something a little bit darker and maybe dustier than this shade, but I can kind of see it at the same time. Either way, this is easily another favorite. I just absolutely love this shade of blue. I think it's so beautiful, so soothing. It reminds me of tropical island waters, so I am just gonna be loving this shade in the summertime. So again, formula-wise, this one applied really well. I would say this one had a little bit more of like a milky kind of touch to it, but it still is pretty sheer where you're gonna have visible nail line even after 3 coats. But I definitely think the third coat is worth it for this shade because it just intensifies the color and it is so gorgeous. Next we have Blurple Jelly, and this one is obviously a blue-purple kind of color. This one, no surprise, is another standout polish. I think it is just so beautiful. I'm definitely a fan of any kind of blurple colors because they're basically like dark periwinkles, which I am a big fan of. And this one just builds up so beautifully. Again, it is going to be really sheer on the first coat where you just get that wash of color, but it still is pretty even for the most part. It starts to build up nicely in 2 coats, where I think it could be passable depending on your preference, but I really think the 3rd coat makes that color pop. And while it definitely is a blurple shade, I feel like this leans a little bit more on the purple side to me. And rounding out the collection, we have Pink Lady Jelly, and this one is described as a medium, cool-toned pink. I definitely think that is a fair description. It's not quite a bubblegum pink, it is a little bit cooler, where it almost wants to be one of those like orchid pinks, but I don't think it's exactly that either. Unsurprisingly, this one, like the others in this collection, had a great formula that applied really well and was very even coverage on the first coat alone. I think you could totally wear it in 1 coat if you wanted just like a sheer wash of pink color, but I definitely prefer this either built up in 2 or 3 coats just to intensify the color a little bit more. It is just so pretty, especially once it's built up in 3. So I wanted to do some collages for these shades, especially to show the differences in 1, 2, and 3 coats. So here's the full collection on 1 coat. I feel like the shades Poppy and Mango have the most pigmentation to them on the first coat, but Poppy isn't as even coverage. And here they are on 2 coats, where they definitely all start to build up a little bit more in terms of their color. They obviously are still going to be very sheer, but I think they're perfect if you want to do like glitter gradient or something like that. But if you're planning on wearing them on their own, I definitely think they look the best in 3 coats because they're just a little bit more opaque and they're just even brighter. They literally look like juicy candies. I love them so much. And here is the collection worn as a skittle in the sun and then in the shade in a bit. I'm wearing them in 2 coats here just because I imagine a lot of people would be doing 2 coats for polishes. I do think they are pretty passable. Obviously there is going to be a decent amount of nail line on some of the lighter shades like Mango and Starfruit, but my thumb that had Blurple and Pink Lady were still pretty sheer too, but they were even coverage, so I definitely think they are passable and don't look that bad. It's all personal preference though, but here's the same skittle built up in 3 coats in the sun, and I absolutely am obsessed with these. They literally make the perfect skittle. And finally, here is a close-up of the collection lineup. I think it is just so perfect. You know I'm obsessed with rainbow anything, and this is such a great rainbow lineup. Now moving on to comparisons, we're starting with Poppy Jelly and looking at it next to Lucky Jelly, which came out last year for Lunar New Year. That one is like a true red jelly polish, so hopefully you can see just how orange leaning Poppy is, where it's like almost maybe a coral kind of color. If you happen to like wearing these in 1 coat for whatever reason, I feel like that's where they're a little bit more passable, but once you build them up in 2 coats, you really start to see the difference in tone. So I definitely wouldn't call these dupes because Lucky Jelly, again, is more of a red, but it's also a little bit darker. So I wanted to try to see if I could layer some jellies to recreate Poppy. Because Poppy has a bit of that orange kind of warm undertone, I thought that Fuyū Jelly would be a really good base color. That one was from the MXM Tune collection, so it's sadly not around anymore, but it's this really warm kind of peachy shade. So these 2 next to each other are definitely not dupes, but I did think if I layered 1 coat of Lucky Jelly over 2 coats of Fuyū that it might give me something like Poppy, because it feels like it's a perfect in-between, and I feel like it was pretty close. It's just a little bit darker because of Lucky Jelly. But lastly, I wanted to show Poppy next to Paranormal Scream Queen, which was from that super sheer Halloween jelly tinted base kind of collection. Scream Queen is definitely a lot more sheer, but even color-wise, that one is a bit more on the hot pink side, while Poppy is more red-orange. Next for Mango Jelly, I had to show this next to Citron Jelly, which is from the second Glazed collection. I would say that that one is more of a true yellow, but it's still pretty white leaning too, but not a pastel. It's still pretty bright. I also wanted to show it next to Mustard Jelly from the Tortoise set that came back last fall. That one is on the other side where it's a little bit darker, more like amber or mustard leaning, with more of that orangey brown kind of undertone. So these definitely aren't dupes, but I still wanted to show them on 2 coats each side by side. I also thought that mustard would be like the perfect base for Citron Jelly, and that would kind of be a good recreation for Mango. I was honestly pretty impressed with how close this was. I feel like it's not super spot on because there are some darker spots of mustard coming through, but I think that's because I have a skinny brush in Citron. Then for Starfruit Jelly, of course, here it is next to Lime Jelly, which came back in the Sea Glass collection last year. You can see just how yellow leaning Starfruit is, where it definitely is a chartreuse kind of color. This is 2 coats of each, and again, I feel like Starfruit is kind of like the perfect in-between shade to some of these existing jellies, so I thought maybe if I layered Citron over Lime, that would be a bit of a closer recreation. When I did 1 coat of Citron over 2 coats of Lime, I feel like there's just too much green coming through, so I ended up trying 1 coat of Citron over 1 coat of Lime as seen here, and I feel like it's pretty close, but again, there's still like a little too much green coming through. It could be because of my skinny brush in Citron, so I ended up doing a second layer of Citron just to give it a bit more yellow coverage. And again, it's not an exact match or dupe, but I feel like it's still pretty close. And lastly, I wanted to show Starfruit next to Ghoulfriend from the same Scream Queen collection. I feel like these are basically the same color, so just in case you wanted a shade like Ghoulfriend but an actual jelly polish that was pigmented, I would definitely recommend Starfruit. Then for Lagoon Jelly, I'm showing it next to Aqua Jelly, which was from the Sea Glass collection last year. That one is more of like a true sky blue kind of shade, while Lagoon, I, funny enough, would kind of call an aqua. So these two are definitely not dupes. Here they are on 2 coats side by side, but I was feeling pretty confident that I could recreate Lagoon. I feel like I kind of did last year when the Sea Glass collection came out. I did layer Aqua and Lime together, and I feel like that created more of a true robin's egg kind of shade. As you can see though, Lagoon is a little bit lighter, so I ended up doing a thin coat of Linen, which is their white sheer polish, on top of that. And again, while it's not an exact match or like a dupe or anything, I feel like it's still pretty close. Then for Blurple Jelly, I wanted to show this next to Morningtide, which is one of my favorite jellies from Cirque. This one is more of like a periwinkle blue kind of shade, so it's definitely nowhere near as purple as Blurple Jelly. And I feel like the closest purple is Ube Jelly, which was from last year's Gourmand collection, but as you can see, that one is a lot lighter and just nowhere near Blurple. But again, I was feeling pretty confident with layering some of these jellies together, so I thought maybe Ube and Morningtide would make a pretty good match for Blurple, but as you can see, it's a little bit too light. So then I thought of adding a layer of Cobalt Jelly in between Ube and Morningtide, and I feel like this is the closest that I could get to duping Blurple with some of the jellies I already had in my collection. I was just really impressed with how close this was. I feel like my layering though was a little bit more on the blue side, so I ended up doing a second coat of Ube on top of that just to give it a little bit more purple. I don't think it's totally necessary, but still fun to experiment. And lastly, for Blurple Jelly, I wanted to show it next to BanShee Better Work from the Scream Queen collection. If you were disappointed in how sheer that shade was, just like I was, because you were looking forward to that beautiful Blurple color in the bottle, Blurple Jelly is pretty much an exact color match, but with a much more pigmented jelly formula. And lastly, for Pink Lady Jelly, I wanted to show this quickly next to Peach Jelly from the Glazed collection in 2020. That one is obviously a lot lighter, more of a peachy pink kind of color, so you can see how orchid leaning Pink Jelly is. If anything, it's a bit closer to Rosewater Jelly from last year's Gourmand collection. I would say they both have that same cool pink kind of tone, but Rosewater is just a lot lighter and more sheer. So for a slightly darker version, I think Berry Jelly is a pretty close comparison maybe. Obviously that one is a little bit more purple leaning, but it just seems like it's a few shades darker than Pink Lady, so I thought they were kind of close, and maybe I could use Berry Jelly as my base to recreate Pink Lady. So I did 1 coat of Berry as my base and then 1 coat of Rosewater on top of that, but as you can see, it was just a little bit too sheer, so even doing a second coat of Rosewater wasn't really giving me that same pink color as Pink Lady. I feel like my recreation was a little bit more on the dusty or mauvey side. Maybe in some angles they look a little bit more similar, but I don't think this was as close as some of the others. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons for Cirque's Glazed 2024 collection. As always, I would love to know what your thoughts are on this release because obviously I am just so obsessed with it. It is just such a perfect lineup of shades, even though they are definitely brighter than what I would expect for like a spring release. I am not gonna be complaining about it. I am just happy to have such bright, juicy colors. Now, I know a lot of you guys are just really over the jelly train, but I am totally here for it. I really hope it's like a trend that doesn't go away, and I really would love to see more brands do jellies. But so far, Cirque has been killing it with the jellies that they've put out, and I feel like this lineup is just absolutely perfect. Now, obviously, based off of the comparisons, these definitely are kind of similar to some of their previous shades, so if you don't happen to have any Cirque jellies, I definitely think this is a great lineup to just try. But if you do happen to have a few of the other shades, you probably could just recreate some of these colors yourself. I honestly was pretty impressed with myself with how close I was able to get some of those recreations. Granted, it's a lot easier to just use one polish instead of like layering them up, but that's kind of the fun thing about jellies, is actually layering them and creating new colors. So yeah, you'll have to let me know what you think of this release. It's already available on Cirque's website at the time that you're watching this. So as a reminder, I am an affiliate with Cirque, so if you do want to support me and my channel, you can shop these shades through the link in my description, or you can use my code PolishedYogi10 to save 10% off your order if you haven't used my code before. Make sure to let me know any and all thoughts that you have down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!